You're with me, Ed Stott, and that's helpful for your weekly dose of self-improvement backed by science. If you're just joining me, welcome, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you've been listening for a while now and you're enjoying our little community, please leave me a review wherever you're listening. It helps other people find us, and it brings me so much joy you have no idea. Okay, begging over. Today, we're talking gratitude. It's one of those words that's everywhere, particularly if you're interested in self-improvement and your health. But what does the science actually say about introducing a little more gratitude into our lives and the best ways to go about it? Well, Professor Fuschia Sirois is a psychologist from the University of Durham who's been studying gratitude for much of her career. Today, we're going to get answers to those questions and take a look at how gratitude can bring us closer to our future selves. Fuschia, when we talk about gratitude, what are you actually studying? Because it seems like a tricky concept to pin down. How do you define it?
Well, it can be defined in a couple of different ways. I tend to, in my research, look at it as sort of almost a stable orientation, kind of a grateful mindset. So we often think of gratitude as something that you experience in the moment, right? So someone does something nice for you. It's a very social emotion. You experience gratitude that they helped you or that they, did something that benefited you. And yes, gratitude can be defined as a positive emotional state that we experience when, people have done something to us. We're on the receiving end of some sort of help that is valuable or assistance that is valuable. So it is often defined as sort of those positive feelings that arise from the assistance that, we might receive from other people and that we notice as being positive, and is that we, appreciate. So people can do positive things for us, but we may not always appreciate it, in which case we wouldn't experience gratitude.
Yeah, right. Which I think is often for most of us, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's some ways of differentiating that too. So that's more the emotional state. But you can also have people that have more of a grateful mindset. So they are prone to see the world in ways that elicits a greater frequency and intensity of grateful experiences, and across a wider range of different areas of their lives too. And so a lot of the research that I've done on gratitude has been looking at this sort of mindset and what happens when you have this grateful mindset. How is it implicated in your health and well-being? And I have a particular interest in health as well. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we mean by gratitude. It can be either sort of a state, an emotional state that you experience in the moment, especially in social exchanges, or it could also be just getting up in the morning and looking at a beautiful sunrise and having that momentary experience of gratitude too. So it doesn't always have to arise in social situations, but it can also be, if you do this frequently, you could be seen to be someone who is more of a grateful person.
And so we'll get into this a little bit more later on in our chat, but when, some people I do have more gratitude, or they just seem to operate with more gratitude. Do we know why that is? Is that, genetic? Is it a natural predisposition? Is it the way we were raised? Is it society? What is that?
Well, there's a few different models and hypotheses on how that comes about. I think I do think that gratitude and having that grateful mindset is something that can be cultivated. And so if you engage, there's simple things you can do to increase gratitude. And if done over time, you just naturally start doing that and thinking about the world that way. But some of the other theories that have been put forward have to do with sort of the attributions that we make about our exchanges, especially with other people. So, we can talk about a general gratitude, which is that just being grateful for having good health or grateful for good weather or a beautiful sunrise, that type of thing. Or we can think about benefit triggered gratitude, whereby we receive a benefit from somebody. So we're the beneficiary of, some kind act or some generous act from another individual. But as I said earlier, just being on the receiving end doesn't mean that you're going to experience gratitude. And so one of the sort of explanations for who does experience more gratitude in those situations has to do with how that act is seen. So if somebody does something nice for you, and you're someone who's just oriented towards being more grateful in general, you would see that that act that they did for you as being valuable to you. So it's important to you. It actually is something that you value. So you see it as a positive. You would see it as costly to the giver. So it's someone it's not just, oh, here, have this. It's somebody actually taking effort or cost or time or what have you, or money to do something for you. And the third point is really important too, is if you see that it's something that's valuable to you and it's costing them, but you also have to have that viewpoint that they're not expecting anything in return, that it's being done altruistically. And that's really the turning point there, because you could say, oh, this is valued to me and it really costs them. But if you're cynical, you go, yeah, but what do you want in return? Right. So then you're not going to experience gratitude in those sorts of experiences. You're going to think that the person's getting something out of it. Right. Then it's not just altruistic. And so those three ingredients have to be there in how we view those social exchanges to experience that gratitude. And people who are more grateful tend to just view their social exchanges that way. They don't have that cynical edge where they're going, they're going to want something back later, or they're doing it just to make themselves look good or to feel good about themselves. None of that even comes into the mind of someone who's truly grateful.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And so I want to talk about some of the benefits and some of the health impacts of gratitude in a minute. But can you first tell me, when did we start to study gratitude and kind of wake up to how valuable a tool it is for us?
So some of the more pioneering work or early work on gratitude was done a little over 20 years ago. And that research, was sort of highlighting, first of all, one of the things it did was we have to be able to study something too. You have to be able to measure it. And so with the introduction of some scales, some self-report ways of assessing gratitude and also defining it that occurred, like I said, over 20 years ago, that sort of started things on a bit of a movement towards that. And then afterwards, scientists had to get on board with it and basically say, okay, this is something we want to study. And it sounds a bit, kind of people go, it could be a bit flaky studying gratitude in that. And actually, one of my colleagues and good friends, Alex Wood, who's like one of the, most renowned researchers in the world on gratitude. So he got into studying it, back when he was a PhD student, but he set out to disprove gratitude. So being a real hardcore scientist, he says, it can't possibly, it's something else going on. So let's conduct all these rigorous studies, which he did. And each time he would conduct a study, he'd see that actually gratitude was important and it was predicting over and above other things. Like, okay, so my study wasn't rigorous enough. And he'd come back and he'd do another and another. And eventually he'd just go, I give gratitude actually is something. Right?
How good. That's so funny. Wow. It's so interesting. Yeah. So you've also looked into gratitude in your research and you've studied it specifically in relation to health. Can you tell me about some of the things that you found in your studies?
Yeah. And so I think looking at gratitude with respect to health is relatively new. So it's only, not even a decade old in terms of that research. And so some of the early research that I did, and actually this is where I sort of had met Alex and we worked together on this research, is looking at the benefits of gratitude for people who are living with chronic health conditions. And that... you kind of think, okay, you've got a chronic health condition, you've got pain, you've got fatigue, like you're kind of thinking, there's not a lot I got grateful for. Like someone might look at that situation. But in fact, if you've got the grateful mindset, you could actually do fairly well. And this is what we found in our study. We looked at people with arthritis and people with inflammatory bowel disease, 2 autoimmune conditions. And over a 6-month period, we found that even when we controlled for all kinds of other predictors of depression, gratitude still was, a unique predictor of depression 6 months later, and that being lower depression. And so that kind of, I think kind of got me hooked on looking at it with respect to health. So too, because, okay, there's something going on here that even under these really challenging contexts, seeing things in a more grateful manner clearly has benefits for well-being and health too, because in medical populations, if you have a lot of stress or if you're, depression, all these things actually can exacerbate symptoms and pain and also over time can actually contribute to disease progression in certain conditions as well too. So it is really an important ingredient, I think, for helping to not just make people manage better and cope better, but potentially also maybe not have as severe a condition as what they could without having that grateful mindset.
It is absolutely incredible, isn't it? So what were the physical benefits that you saw in those studies? Because I know you looked into chronic illnesses and autoimmune diseases, amongst other things. But what were the actual physical differences that you saw between people who had gratitude, who were dealing with these diseases, and people who didn't?
Yeah, so in one study, so we looked further with people with fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain syndrome. This is another study we looked at. What we wanted to do was to compare, first of all, we wanted to see, do levels of gratitude differ? Because, as I said, you would think, someone's got a chronic health condition, is their gratitude levels going to be the same as someone who doesn't have these health issues to deal with? And then also, regardless of those differences, does it operate the same way in terms of, overall mental well-being and specifically with respect to disease-related or health-related well-being and quality of life? So what we looked at was quality of life. And what we did find, not surprisingly, is that people with fibromyalgia had lower levels of gratitude, of sort of that a chronic tendency to be grateful. And not surprising. You wake up every day with pain and fibro fog, and, it's hard sometimes to see the positives. But what we did find, though, is that even for that group, having that grateful mindset, so that more of a tendency to be grateful, in people that had fibro, they experienced higher levels of overall, mental well-being and quality of life, and also physical quality of life. So it wasn't specific symptoms; it was more like a global measure of their overall physical quality of life.
Yeah, wow. And you've also looked into the relationship between gratitude and future orientation. What is future orientation, and how is it related to gratitude?
Yeah, that's one that doesn't seem like it's that obvious of a connection. Although, there's been quite more studies than you would think looking at gratitude and future orientation. So future orientation, there's a lot of ways of thinking about it. It can be your future time orientation, whereby the time frame that you give the most consideration to when you make decisions is the future. We all have our own favorite time frame. We think about across the past, present, and future, but if your go-to time frame is the future, then you're going to be planning things more. You're going to be more focused on future outcomes rather than sort of immediate gains and that type of thing. And at first, it would seem that something like gratitude, which is so much in the present, like we think of the emotional state. Someone does something good for you, you feel gratitude in that moment. It seems very present focused, right? But actually, some of the research that's been done, especially neuroscience research, has found that people who are grateful, there's something about when somebody does something nice for you, it has you thinking that you're grateful for that experience, but you also may be thinking again ahead to when you can do something nice for them or do something nice to somebody else. So it actually triggers something about thinking ahead. And this is what they found even in a couple of studies where they actually had people engage in, gratitude-inducing types of tasks and exercises, gratitude lists, these types of things. And then looked, before and after, and what some of the changes they saw related to greater activation of this sort of future-oriented thinking. And it's been done sort of more correlationally as well, too. So that's more at the neuroscience level. But one of the reasons that I was particularly interested in future orientation and gratitude was with respect to health and health behavior. So, if you've got a health behavior, if you're thinking, okay, I want to exercise more, I want to eat healthier, I want to hit my ideal weight, I want to live a long, healthy life. So these are all goals. Goals are naturally future oriented, but you're thinking ahead about the person you want to be. You're thinking about your future you, right? And I was starting to find in some of my research that people who were grateful tended to engage in better health behaviors. And you're thinking, okay, so why is that? What is it about engaging in better health behaviors? Now, one hypothesis is, well, we know that people who are happier or more positive, tend to have lower levels of negative emotions, which can interfere with practicing health behaviors. That might be one possible explanation. I'm certainly a contributor. But in some of the data that we've started to analyze and look at, we also find that having more of a future orientation, either a general one or feeling closer to one's future self, also seems to explain why people who have a grateful mindset tend to engage in more health behaviors. And that makes sense because we know future orientation is strongly related to the practice of health behaviors. But the fact that it's coming through as a sort of a side quality of having a grateful mindset too is quite fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting. And so is that the major benefit of being more future oriented, that we tend to take better care of our health and make more steps to take care of our health for the future?
Yeah, because if you're more future oriented, you're thinking ahead. Yeah. You're always thinking about not just future you. You might feel closer to future you. Future you is not like a stranger. It's actually you. And so, you want to take care of the welfare of that future self. But you're also planning more, right? And what that does then too, because, health behaviors represent these, what we call temporal dilemmas, right? So, you're hungry and you've got a choice of things to eat. You got to have that nice apple, which is healthy and, will give you energy later in the day. It'll also maybe feed into your other longer term health goals. And so let's say you have to have those health goals, of course, in the first instance. So you've said, I'm going to eat healthier, right? I'm going to cut back on sugars and eat more natural foods. But you're in the moment there too, and someone's put a piece of chocolate cake in front of you. And now you've got a temporal dilemma. Do I eat this cake, which would taste really good right now? Right? So do I satisfy an immediate goal of feeling good now? Or do I push that aside and think about the goals, how I'm going to feel later? Like if I continue eating on my goal towards eating healthier and getting healthier overall, and how good I'm going to feel down the road. So that's the trade-off between immediate you and future you. And the extent that you have to remember about future you, right? So having a future orientation, that brings future you into the equation. If you don't have much of a future orientation, you're actually not even going to be thinking about that. You're going to be thinking, me right now really wants that chocolate cake because I've had a hard day and that would be really good.
I always think about this. I think about, I've heard it referred to as long or short time preference. And so obviously if you have long time preference, then you lean more towards thinking about your future self, and you have short time preference, you're going to be the person who's going for the chocolate cake. But I always think about this because, I'm like a avid sun protection person, particularly living in Australia. Like you have to be so conscious of it. So I've got like the big wacky hat. I've got the zinc, I've got the weird looking lip balm. I've got it all on. But that's because I have a long time preference, and genuinely future. It's because I'm vain. It's because I don't want to be wrinkly. It's nothing sensible. But then you see other people, who love to like sunbathe now. They don't really, they wouldn't necessarily wear a hat. They like to have a tan on their skin. And so one of the primary examples of like long or short time preference for me, I often think about is like the sunscreen thing and whether people bother about that. So, and I've often thought about that and what makes people lean towards that. Cause for me, I'm like, damn, come on, this is way cheaper than Botox.
Yeah, no, I know. So what you're calling long and short. So we, more technically would call more future or present versus oriented. Right. Yeah. So you're focused on either long-term rewards or short-term rewards. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think I'd even considered why I did that before now, other than thinking I'm very vain, which I am. But it's interesting to think about it a bit more scientifically. So how can we start to introduce a little more gratitude into our lives? Clearly, there are huge benefits. If it can make us deal with any illnesses or diseases better and make our standard of living much better and improve our mental health and also make us look after ourselves for the future. It's clearly something we want more of in our lives. So how can we introduce a little more gratitude? What are some of the simple techniques that we can use that you've found to be particularly effective?
Well, there's several different ways. I think ones, if you're, a lot have to do with practicing alone or whether you're practicing with others. So the ones that have been sort of foremost in the research literature over the past couple of decades since sort of gratitude came on the scene as a scientific construct of interest to researchers. There's two really. One is the gratitude lists. And the other is the gratitude diaries. And you'll see these all over. Like there's apps now that have these, and you can see gratitude books and diaries and these types of things. So it has really made its way into the mainstream. But these are based on some of the early scientific studies that were happening in the early 2000s and have continued. The evidence on their effectiveness, it varies a lot because it depends on how often people are doing them and the population, et cetera. And so basically what the list is like 3 good things, right? So what 3 good things happened to you today? And often you do this at the end of the day. It's sort of a reflection. And it's a nice practice because often we're so busy going through the day and we don't often have a chance to reflect on things. And if you're not used to doing that, it gives you a pause to sit back and really go, right, there were some good things that happened today, and so you could just write these three good things. And, it can be something really hedonic, like, I had a really delicious lunch, right? Which is, it's that's the word low level in terms of the things to appreciate, but like with 3 things that you really appreciate. Yeah. Or, somebody did something for you, or you really enjoyed your walk out in the woods, in nature and that type of thing. And actually, these one of the aspects we didn't really talk about with health, though, is sleep. And so this is research that Alex Wood had done previously. And that's why I always say if you're going to do these gratitude lists, it's actually good to do them before you go to bed, because he's shown in his research quite clearly, and others have sort of followed up with that as well, too, that in people who go through and kind of think about the things that they're grateful for before they go to sleep, actually sleep better. They tend not to not wake up. They sleep longer. They have a better quality of sleep. And the reason is when you're being grateful and thinking about the things that you really appreciate, it short circuits some of the thoughts and worries that can come into our heads as we're lying down. When you go to bed at night, you're like, oh, this didn't happen. And you start thinking about all the bad stuff. It just pushes that all aside, and it helps you focus on actually there were some good things. So it can actually have some health benefits through sleep as well, too, which is great. So that's the gratitude list. The diaries are similar. They're just a little bit more, involved. And when I say the research is mixed, I think because a lot of the research, do you get people to do it frequently? So and everyone has a different tolerance. So if you do it daily and you're not used to it, you can kind of go, I don't have anything this day. You do it every other day, that might work. And we, experimentally with some of my clinical students, that I was previously supervising, that, we try, titering. When is it every day? Is it every other day? Like, how often do you do this, right? Before you kind of just habituate to it and you don't actually get the benefits anymore. And the results were never really that strong. And in the research literature as well, too, you kind of think, okay, it's sort of increasing gratitude, but I think that the way these lists can make you more of a grateful person over time is because it puts gratitude on your radar first.
Yeah.
And if you start practicing it, and what they've shown in some studies, there was at least a couple of studies that showed that some of the effects of the gratitude list, for example, persisted for 6 months. And I don't think it's because it's a really strong effect. I think what's happening is people live the studies and then they go home and then they keep doing it. And so to the extent that it becomes a regular practice where you don't need the list anymore, you just do it in your head and you just do it naturally whenever it seems, like the right time, that's the mechanism that sort of, reinforces it and gets you thinking like a grateful person to when it just becomes more natural.
Yeah, right. That's fascinating. And what about if we're in a group? How can we practice group gratitude?
So group gratitude is a really great way to do it, especially I think this is a lot of the research that's been done on gratitude has been done with children as well, too, because children are really open to these things. And I know I heard about this practice once years ago when my little one was still little. She's not so little anymore, but, we'd sit around, the dinner table and practicing gratitude in other people is really good for everybody because A, you're saying it out loud. Okay. And it makes you think about that. But when you hear other people talking about what they're grateful for, it makes you think a little bit more like, yeah, I can find something too. And so, there's different ways of doing it. We used to do like a talking stick. So you'd have the wooden spoon, you pass around. Okay, it's your turn. What are you grateful for today? And then, you'd go around and even the most reluctant family members, would be like, oh, okay, I think I can come up with something too. And it got to the point where, she was quite young at the time. I can't remember. She was like 7 or something. And she was like, let's do the talking stick. And I've got some things I want to say. So, because kids really want to share what they're grateful for. And so I think in those sorts of family contexts, especially with children, the children can be the great motivators to get that sort of thing going. But we did, also an installation on gratitude a couple of years back. It was part of this big event. It was called the Festival of the Mind, and it was sort of a collaboration between scientists and artists. And so we work with a graphics firm, and they made these cards that look like bricks, and we called it the Wall of Gratitude. And it was this huge wall, maybe 20 feet long. I don't know how high, and it was all taped out so that you could put these bricks in. And at the top it says 3 good things. And so people were invited to come and write 3 good things and put them on the wall. And we seated a couple of them up there first. And so people would come up and, they'd be walking through this big gallery, and they come over to our installation. Oh, you can write something. Oh, no, I'm okay. And you'd watch, and they'd go through and they'd read everything that everyone else was grateful for. And then they'd quietly make their way back over to the podium. And next thing you know, they were writing down something. So that's that sort of social contagion. When we hear or read about what other people are grateful for, it naturally orients us towards thinking about what's going on in our lives that are positive, that we maybe need to appreciate a bit more.
Yeah, that's lovely, isn't it? I really think it's true, that social contagion. And you can imagine, introducing this at the dinner table, or introducing this at your work meeting, or introducing this when you catch up with your friends. Like, it's a really easy thing, and something that's really lovely to do as well. Very enjoyable.
Yeah. And, and often it'll start off with just like, yeah, I had a great lunch. Like, people have a hard time sometimes taking it seriously, but it can just be sort of a fun social bonding thing. But sometimes you might have some things to be really grateful for, and if you've got that, if you're meeting with the same group of friends for lunch, for example, and you kind of make that a regular thing, maybe you only do it once a week or whatever. It can really open your eyes up a bit more to all the things that there are to be grateful for in life. I think that's the really key thing. There's lots there. All right. And this goes back to the definition of gratitude, right? Which is noticing and then appreciating the positives in life. So you can't appreciate the positives unless you notice them. And you can't notice them unless you're willing to look for them and you're not always sort of caught up in the negative.
Do you think obviously this kind of practice predisposes us to kind of look out for and clock the things that we're positive for, but do you think it also in some ways reminds us of what genuinely brings us joy and improves our lives and makes us seek out more of that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. There's been, that sort of grateful practices are also part of sort of larger spheres of understanding happiness, which is finding meaning, right? And so to find meaning in life and to find purpose, you have to be grateful for certain things. You have to be able to recognize positives. That's sort of almost a foundational step there. So I think it can really set the foundation for finding happiness, finding joy. It's not just you doing it for its own sake, but it can lay down a good solid foundation from which to see things in life as being more meaningful and seeing life in a more positive way.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. How lovely. And so when we're doing these gratitude practices, should we be focusing on smaller things or bigger things, or it doesn't matter? It's just generally good things.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. And I mean, this is the thing we were curious about. So when we collected all those cards, and we did end up at the end of this 3-day event with hundreds of them, and we started analyzing them, and they were all over the map. Like some of them were very food oriented. Food came up quite a bit.
Yeah, that would be me.
Well, that's a hedonic pleasure, right?
Yeah.
It's a small joy. It's a hedonic joy and happiness. It's that in the moment. Others were much more meaningful, much larger, like, 10 years of sobriety, surviving cancer. Wow. A lot were social, having supportive friends, supportive family, pets, so it can be anything. And I think that's really the key, is not to put restrictions around it, is just allow yourself, even if it's something small, certain times, I mean, well, maybe not in your part of the world, in this part of the world, I walked around like last week and just seeing all the daffodils coming up. It's like, flowers are coming up through the ground. And, you just like,
yeah,
it's spring is coming. Like, so that, that's a positive to kind of be grateful for. And so you can start small with seemingly, maybe not that important things. And other days there will be things, depending on what comes into, your mindset, or what you experience. Maybe you met somebody and then you go, yeah, I'm really grateful to have that friend, or something reminds you of some privilege or some benefit or some positive that you have that maybe you take for granted. And I think that's the key thing about gratitude, is it's sort of the antithesis to taking things for granted, right? We have a lot. We usually have way more than what we imagine, and especially if you start comparing to people who might be going through difficulties, who are in far worse circumstances. We often don't realize just how good our lives are. There's always somebody who's not in as good a position as we are. And so for that, we have a lot to be grateful for, but we just don't always practice it. Part of this has to do with the negativity bias that we have, right? We're focused on the negative, not on the positive. So it takes effort to focus on those positives and notice them. But to the extent that you do that, you can cultivate that grateful mindset.
Are there any pitfalls when it comes to practicing gratitude, or in any ways that we might not be doing it in the best way that we possibly can?
Well, I think you can't force it, right? And I don't, and people, there is, again, some evidence that people who are more severely depressed, gratitude's not going to work, right? No. Like, you're just not in the right mind frame for that, and telling someone to be grateful when they're feeling that way. Because then they can start to feel guilty. Well, and they can feel guilty that they're not being grateful. And and that doesn't help either, right? No. So, it isn't a one size fits all. It's not a cure all, but I think, again, we're operating outside of the realm of severe psychopathologies. Most of us, I think, can find something, in our lives, even something small, to be grateful for. But again, you do it at your own pace, and you don't force yourself. And it's got to be something that gives way to those feelings. If you're doing it just out of routine, I know, and this goes back to the idea of how often do you do it, right? It's got to be, because then it doesn't mean anything if you're doing, these are 3 good things that happen. Like, that's not what gratitude is. It's about actually noticing and then feeling that full sense of appreciation for those positives.
One of my friends recently, she told me that she started trying to implement more gratitude into her life. And rather than doing a gratitude list, when she notices something that really brings her joy in the day, or that she's really grateful for, she will vocally go, "Oh, joy." And that kind of, and that kind of, that's nice. For her, in her brain, it kind of clocks it and makes, she tallies it off. She talks it up like, "Oh, joy, that's brought me joy." And that's, for her, is how she notices it, which I really like.
Yeah, no, and that's what you want to be doing. I mean, the lists are just like a starting point, I think. You don't have to write it down, but that's a great way to sort of make it by having a sound or saying it out loud. The same way that having doing those lists verbally in social situations make it more real rather than just in your head, I think that's a great way. And that's what it is about. Like, you do experience that joy. Like, so something positive happened to you. It is whatever that positive is, noticing it first. and foremost, and then appreciating it, savoring it. That's sort of at the heart of gratitude.
Yeah, how lovely. And how can gratitude contribute to social harmony as well? Like not just make our own lives nicer, but make communities and socially a lot better place for us all.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't research in this area myself, but there has been a lot of research done more on just the social exchange that happens, and gratitude cements social bonds. Even knowing that you thank somebody for something. So I think they've done studies where they've had, students write a thank you note to teachers, and just the act of engaging in that, again, made them feel sort of more connected. So again, I don't do this research on the social aspects so much. I'm more focused on the health and well-being more generally. But it is a social emotion. And one of the things that can happen is, it's kind of like gratitude can be expressed in a couple of different ways. So in these social situations, so you can have a reciprocal altruism. So when somebody does something nice for you, they're not expecting anything back, right? So true, and that, right? So you're not being cynical, but you may want to do something back for that person just because they made you feel so good by that wonderful act, a kind act that they did to you, and you felt so grateful for it. So you can have this sort of reciprocal altruism where you want to go and do more for them. Okay. And this often happens with relationships that are ongoing. So it could be colleagues, coworkers, friends, family members, people you're going to see on a regular basis to do that. But every once in a while, though, too, someone might do something for us that we feel really grateful for, and then we'll never see that person again. So what do you do in that situation? And I think this really speaks to the power of gratitude in those social relationships, because you don't just go, oh, well, right. You actually, what the research has shown is then in those instances, then you're now motivated more to go do something else for somebody else, even though they didn't do anything for you. So it's kind of it's like a pay it forward kind of altruism, or, so I can't thank that person and do something, to show my gratitude to them. So I'm just going to do a kind act to somebody else to just keep that flow of gratitude going. And that's what it does. It keeps the flow of gratitude going. And whether, they go on and do it back to you or to somebody else, it keeps the flow going. And I think that's what really can strengthen those social bonds, is having those types of gratitude-based connections with people.
Yeah, that's lovely. Isn't that nice? I really like that. It's just gratitude can benefit us in so many ways. If we only remember one thing about trying to introduce a little more gratitude into our lives and something that's really going to work, it's backed by science, what should we remember?
I think it's, what we know in terms of what's backed by science with gratitude is sort of the takeaway there again is when you do it. So at the end of the day, it's going to give you the most benefits there in terms of the health. So that is probably the best time to do it before you go to bed, reflecting on the day. You're going to get some immediate benefits. You're going to feel good then, but it's going to help you sleep. And whether that's done as a list or just thinking about things, I think the key thing is, getting into a regular practice, right? That's what's going to cultivate that grateful mindset.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. I love that. No, absolutely. I love it. So, yeah, regular practice and, cultivating that mindset with that regular backing up and you can see how that's going to change our mindsets, which is lovely. This has been so great. Thank you so much, Fuschia. I really appreciate you sparing me the time.
No worries at all. It was lovely chatting with you again.
What a joy. Professor Fuschia Sirois is a psychologist from the University of Durham. I'm going to put all the links to her work and where you can find out more about what she does in the show notes. So make sure you go and check that out because there really is more to this. I'm so grateful to you for joining me. You're definitely making it onto my gratitude list tonight. I promise you that. And I tell you what, if you go and leave me a review wherever you're listening, you're going to get on there twice. So good things are coming to you, I promise. Make sure you do. Thank you so much. And if you're just joining us for the first time, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Ed Stott, and I sincerely hope that's helpful.